For centuries, the galaxy had waited for a moment like this. Not war, not conquest. Contact. The Aurelian conquered, a vast alliance of peaceful civilizations, had explored nearly every corner of known space. They had catalogued stars, studied ancient ruins, and uplifted primitive worlds. But one question always remained unanswered. Were they truly alone at the beginning? Then one day the silence broke. It started as noise. Unstructured, chaotic, emotional. A flood of electromagnetic signals burst from a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. The signals were unlike anything the conquered had encountered before. Most species transmitted structured mathematics or universal constants. But this was different. There was music, beautiful, chaotic, layered with emotion. There were voices shouting in anger, laughing in joy, crying in grief. There were broadcasts of war, followed by stories of love. It was messy, contradictory, alive. The world was called Earth. The species human. At first, the conquered hesitated. Some feared the volatility of such a species. Others argued that intelligence born from chaos might be dangerous. But curiosity won. It always did. A diplomatic fleet was assembled, unarmed, non-threatening, carefully designed to appear as peaceful as possible. Their mission was simple: introduce themselves, and hope humanity chose peace. The first contact took place in orbit above Earth. Human satellites detected the fleet immediately. Panic spread across the planet, but it didn't last long. Within hours, global communication networks stabilized. Military responses were restrained. Then a message was sent. Not aggressive, not defensive, just cautious. Identify yourselves. The conquered responded in kind, translating their language in real time. We come in peace. The words echoed across Earth's networks. And for a moment, just a moment, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Then humanity answered. Then welcome. The meeting itself was unlike anything the Aurelians had experienced. Humans were smaller than expected, fragile-looking, emotional. But their eyes carried something deeper. Fear, yes, but also determination. Curiosity. Defiance. The human representatives stood aboard a neutral orbital station, facing beings from across the stars, and they didn't run. They asked questions. So many questions. About technology, about other species, about the galaxy beyond their sky. But they avoided one topic: their own defenses. At first, it seemed natural. Many new species were cautious about revealing military capabilities. But something felt off. Subtle, easy to ignore, but impossible to forget. It was a junior Aurelian sensor officer who noticed it first. A fluctuation. Small, almost invisible, deep in the outer reaches of the Sol system. At first, it looked like a sensor glitch, gravitational readings that didn't match visible mass. Light bending where nothing existed, space curving around emptiness. He ran the scan again. Same result. Then again. Still there. His pulse quickened. "Commander," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady, "I'm detecting an anomaly beyond the outer orbit." The commander barely glanced at the readings. "Natural phenomenon." "That's the problem," the officer replied. "It's not behaving like one." More scans followed. Deeper, more precise. And with every new layer of data, the anomaly became harder to explain and more terrifying to consider. Because it wasn't random. It was structured, controlled, hidden. The information was quietly passed to the diplomatic team. The humans were asked, politely, carefully, "Are you aware of any large-scale gravitational distortions in your outer system?" The response came quickly. Too quickly. "No," the human representative said with a calm smile. "Our outer system is unremarkable." The Aurelians exchanged glances. Because their sensors said otherwise. But protocol demanded trust. "For now," As the meeting concluded, optimism filled the fleet. A new species had joined the galactic stage, peacefully. A rare and beautiful thing. But as the conquered ships prepared to leave orbit, the junior officer looked back one last time. Not at Earth, but beyond it, past the orbit of Neptune. Into the dark. He adjusted his visual filters. Enhanced contrast, gravitational mapping overlay. And then, his breath caught in his throat, because for just a fraction of a second, he saw it, not clearly, not fully, but enough, a shape, so massive it swallowed starlight behind it. Perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. The stars in that region weren't visible. They weren't dim. They were gone, like something stood between them and the universe. The officer's voice broke as he whispered, "That's not empty space." The commander turned sharply. "What did you see?" But the readings were already stabilizing. The anomaly faded, as if it had never been there, as if something had noticed them looking, and chosen to hide again. Far below on Earth, human leaders watched the departing fleet. Their expressions were calm, relieved, but behind closed doors, that calm shattered. Because they knew exactly what had been seen, and what had almost been revealed. In the silence of a secured command room, one human officer spoke quietly. "Did they detect it?" Another nodded. Briefly, a long pause followed. Then the final order came. Reinforce the veil. And out beyond the edge of the solar system, something enormous shifted, ever so slightly, as if adjusting its position, as if preparing. Because now, it knew it had been noticed, the celebration didn't last. Across the Aurelian conquered, the official narrative remained unchanged. First contact with humanity had been a success. Peaceful, cooperative, promising. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Quietly, uncomfortably, because while diplomats exchanged praise and scientists shared excitement, a single anomaly report refused to disappear. It had been flagged, reviewed, and marked as inconclusive. Yet no one deleted it. No one could. Because every time it was reanalyzed, it gave the same answer. There was something in the Sol system. Something massive. And something deliberately hidden. In a dimly lit analysis chamber deep within conquered space, Lyra Venn stared at the data for the 100th time. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not anymore. Her clearance had been revoked 2 cycles ago after she pushed too hard, asked too many questions. But curiosity had always been her flaw. And now it felt like survival. She replayed the sensor logs again. Gravitational distortions. Light displacement. Spatial curvature that suggested an object larger than anything ever constructed. And yet, no visual confirmation. No thermal output. No energy signature. Just absence. Perfect controlled absence. "That's not stealth," she whispered to herself. "That's erasure." Lyra leaned back, exhausted, her eyes scanning through intercepted human transmissions she had quietly archived before her access was cut. At first glance, they were meaningless. Fragments of military chatter buried beneath civilian noise. But when arranged, when aligned, a pattern emerged. Repeated phrases, encrypted references, warnings disguised as routine commands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brought them together on screen. Veil protocol active. Maintain outer silence. Last line remains dormant. And then the one that had kept her awake for 3 nights straight. If they ever see it, it's already too late. Lyra swallowed. This wasn't defensive language. This wasn't the tone of a species afraid of invasion. This was the language of something holding something back. She submitted her findings. Officially, carefully worded, non-accusatory. The response came within minutes. Denied. Dismissed. Archived under low priority anomalies. But attached to the response was something else. A warning. Cease further investigation into human outer system readings. This matter is under direct review by High Command. Lyra stared at the message. Then she laughed. A quiet, humorless sound. Direct review, she muttered, which means they're afraid too. That was the moment she made her decision. Not emotional. Not reckless. Inevitable. If the Conquered wouldn't investigate. She would. Her ship, the Saren's Wake, slipped from dock without fanfare. No escort. No clearance. No official record of departure. Just one small vessel entering faster-than-light drift toward a system that suddenly felt far more dangerous than anyone had admitted. The journey to Sol space took less than a standard cycle. But for Lyra, it felt longer. Because the closer she got, the quieter her thoughts became. Not calmer. Quieter. Like instinct itself was telling her something was wrong. When she crossed into the outer edges of the Sol system, everything appeared normal. Too normal. Stars burned steadily. Planetary orbits were stable. No visible anomalies. But her instruments told a different story. The distortions were still there. Subtle, precise, and growing stronger as she moved deeper. Lyra's breath slowed as she adjusted her sensors, pushing them beyond safe limits. "Let's see you," she whispered. Her display flickered. Data streams spiked. Gravitational maps began forming in real time. And then suddenly, every system on her ship glitched. Hard. Lights flickered. Engines stuttered. Her navigation display collapsed into static. What? Then everything went still. Silent. Her ship stopped. Not drifting. Not moving. Held. The stars outside dimmed. Not fading, dimming. As if something vast had stepped between her and the universe. Lyra's pulse hammered in her ears. "Manual control," she ordered. No response. Her crew exchanged terrified glances. And then, the main screen activated on its own. Black. Completely black. No stars. No space. Just void. And in the center of that void, text appeared. Not in Aurelian script. Not in any known language. But perfectly understood. You were not meant to find US. Lyra's throat went dry. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Who are you? The screen didn't change. But something did. She felt it. A presence. Not outside the ship. But around it. Everywhere. Watching. Measuring. Deciding. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, the message changed. Slowly. Deliberately. As if the thing behind it was choosing its words carefully. You should not be here. Lyra forced herself to sit straighter. Fear burned through her, but so did something else. Defiance. You're human, she said, her voice trembling but steady. That's human tech, isn't it? Silence. Then, a final line appeared. And this time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a mistake. We are what remains. The screen went dark. Power returned. Stars snapped back into place. Her ship lurched forward as control systems rebooted. Everything looked normal again. Like nothing had happened. But Lyra didn't move. Because she knew one thing with absolute certainty now. Whatever was hiding in the Sol system wasn't just human, and it had just noticed her. For several seconds, no one on the Saren's Wake spoke. The systems were stable again. The stars outside looked normal. Every reading had returned to expected parameters. But the silence inside the ship felt heavier. Like something had changed in a way instruments couldn't measure. Lyra didn't blink. Her eyes were locked on the main display, where the message had appeared. We are what remains. It echoed in her mind over and over. Not we are human. Not we are defending. Something else. Something worse. Run a full diagnostic, she ordered, her voice controlled but tight. Everything, external sensors, internal systems, signal logs. Her crew snapped into action, relieved to have something to do. Reports came back quickly. No system damage. No foreign code detected. No active signals in the area. Lyra closed her eyes briefly. That's impossible, she whispered. Because something had spoken to them. Not transmitted, spoken. Directly, cleanly, without a trace. Reconstruct the gravitational data from before the blackout, she said. The sensor officer hesitated. Commander, we already tried. It's incomplete. Show me. The display shifted. A 3D map of space unfolded. Stars, orbital paths, gravitational lines. At first glance, it looked ordinary. But then Lyra saw it. Gaps. Not empty space, missing data. Perfectly shaped voids where information should have been. As if something had removed itself from reality, but left pressure behind. Like footprints without a body. Enhance the distortion field, she said quietly. The system complied. The map twisted. Lines bent inward, wrapping around a central region. And slowly, a shape began to emerge. Not visible. Not truly. But outlined by the space it displaced. The bridge fell silent. Because the shape was enormous. Larger than any vessel ever recorded. Larger than entire orbital stations. Its edges curved in unnatural ways, stretching far beyond what a ship should be. It didn't look built. It looked grown. Is that real? One of the crew whispered. Lyra didn't answer. Because she wasn't looking at the shape anymore. She was looking at how it moved. Subtly, barely noticeable, but undeniable. The distortions were shifting, adjusting, like something alive repositioning itself. Watching them. Zoom in, she said. The image focused. The distortion intensified. And for just a fraction of a second, the visual filters caught something. Not the whole structure. Just a surface fragment. Dark. Smooth. Not metallic. Not reflective. Absorbing light itself. And etched across that surface. Faint lines. Patterns. Symbols that didn't match any known human or alien design. But they felt intentional. Deliberate. Ancient. Then the image snapped back to static. The shape vanished again. Hidden. The crew erupted in overlapping voices. That wasn't human. No ship that size could exist. It's manipulating sensor data. Lyra raised her hand. Quiet. They fell silent immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the display. Play back the message, she said. The system complied. The text appeared again. We are what remains. She leaned forward slightly. Not we are human, she murmured. Not we are protecting. Her voice dropped lower. Remains of what? As if answering her question. The lights flickered again. Once. Twice. Then held. Every system stayed online. But something felt wrong. The air itself seemed heavier. Lyra turned slowly toward the viewport. The stars were still there. But dimmer. Just slightly. As if something massive had shifted between them and the ship. But this time, it wasn't hiding completely. External scan, she said quietly. No anomalies, the sensor officer replied automatically. Lyra didn't look at him. Run it again. He did. And froze. Commander. What is it? His voice shook. It's not on the sensors. A pause. Then how do you see it? He pointed. Because it's right there. Lyra stepped forward, slowly, carefully, and looked out into space. At first she saw nothing. Just stars, darkness, silence. Then, her eyes adjusted, and she realized the truth. It wasn't that something was there. It was that something was blocking what should be there. A massive shape outlined only by absence. By the way the stars disappeared behind it. And now, it was closer. Much closer. Her breath caught. Because this time, she could see more. Edges, contours, layers of structure stretching into impossible distances. And near the center, a faint glow. Not bright, not aggressive, but watching, focused, aware. Then the voice returned. Not on the screen, not through speakers. Inside her mind. Clear, heavy, ancient. You see US now. Lyra didn't move, didn't speak, because she knew. If she did, it would answer. The presence pressed closer. Not physically, mentally, like it was reaching into her thoughts. Searching, measuring, judging, and then it asked, "Why did you come?" Lyra swallowed hard. Fear surged through her, but she forced herself to speak. Not as a diplomat, not as a scientist, but as someone facing something far beyond understanding. Because you're hiding something. Silence followed. Long, deep, uncomfortable. Then, the answer came. Slow, deliberate, and far more terrifying than anything before. We are hiding everything. The stars dimmed further. The shape shifted again. Unfolding. Revealing just a little more of itself. And for the first time, Lyra understood. This wasn't just a ship. This was a barrier. A wall. A shield. Holding something back. And then, from the darkness beyond it, something moved. Not the Dreadnought. Something behind it. Something trying to get through. The voice spoke one final time. Quieter now. Urgent. You should have stayed away. Lyra's heart pounded. From you. A pause. Then, no. A deeper silence. Heavier. From what is coming. And as she stared into the darkness beyond the hidden giant, she saw it. For just a second. Something looking back, Lyra didn't look away. She couldn't. Because something had just looked back at her. Not the massive hidden structure, the Dreadnought, the barrier, whatever it truly was. Something behind it. Something deeper. For a single frozen heartbeat, she had seen it. A distortion inside the distortion. A shape that didn't follow any physical law, too sharp in some places, too fluid in others. It didn't reflect light, it didn't absorb it. It warped it. And then it was gone. "Commander," one of her crew whispered, "what did you see?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Because she didn't trust her own voice. "We need to leave," she said finally. No one argued. Not this time. The Saren's wake pulled away slowly at first, engines humming at minimal output. No sudden movements, no aggressive maneuvers. Like prey backing away from a predator that hadn't decided whether to strike. The massive hidden presence didn't follow. But it didn't retreat either. It remained there. Watching, holding, containing. As soon as they reached safe distance, Lyra gave the order. Transmit everything. All data full priority, no encryption delays. The crew hesitated. If this is intercepted, it won't matter, Lyra cut in. If we're right, nothing matters more than this. The transmission fired into deep space, racing toward the Aurelian Conquered. And for the first time since entering Sol, Lyra felt something worse than fear. Certainty. The response from the conquered came faster than expected. Too fast, meaning they had already been watching, already been waiting. Her data didn't shock them. It confirmed their worst suspicions. Within hours, emergency protocols activated across multiple systems. Fleets were mobilized. Defensive formations established. Not as a show of force, but as preparation. Back on Earth, the reaction was immediate. Human governments didn't deny it this time. Didn't deflect. Didn't smile. Instead, every major broadcast channel across the planet, and beyond it, shifted to a single unified transmission. A human officer appeared on screen. No symbols. No flags. Just a face. Tired. Serious. Honest. "You were warned," he said simply. Across the conquered, billions watched in silence. "We told you not to look," he continued. "Not because we feared you, but because we feared what would happen if you saw." He paused, and for a moment, the weight of his words settled over the galaxy. Then he said it. "The veil is not a weapon." Another pause. "It's a lock." The transmission cut. No further explanation. No negotiation. Just that one truth dropped into the minds of every species in the galaxy. Panic spread faster than any fleet. Because if what Lyra had seen was true, then something had been locked away. Something that required a structure that size. Something that even humanity feared. Despite the warning, the conquered fleets continued their advance. Not out of arrogance. Out of fear. Because now they needed to know. Needed to see. Needed to understand what kind of threat could force an entire species to build something like that. They didn't have to travel far. As the first fleet crossed into the outer Sol system, it happened without warning, without build-up, without mercy. Space cracked. There was no explosion, no energy surge, just a soundless fracture spreading across reality itself. Like invisible glass splintering under pressure. The stars near Jupiter's orbit distorted, bent, then vanished entirely behind a growing rupture. Ships halted instinctively. Weapons powered up, then powered down again as targeting systems failed to lock onto anything. Because there was nothing to target. Only the crack, and what was pushing through it. The veil was breaking. At first it looked like darkness spilling into space. But it wasn't empty. It moved. It pulsed. Like something alive pressing against a barrier that could no longer hold. Then, something massive shifted behind it. Not fully visible. Not yet. But enough to make every sensor in the fleet overload simultaneously. Gravitational readings spiked beyond measurable limits. Time itself stuttered for a fraction of a second. And then, the first piece of the hidden structure emerged. The Dreadnought. It didn't appear all at once. It unfolded, layer by layer, segment by segment, as if it had been wrapped in dimensions not meant to be seen. Its surface wasn't solid. It shifted constantly, adapting, reshaping. Lines of energy moved across it like veins. And its sheer size blotted out entire sections of the sky. No one spoke. No one moved. Because every instinct screamed the same truth. This wasn't a ship. This was something built for a purpose far beyond war. Then, it turned. Slowly. Deliberately. Not toward Earth. Not toward the conquered fleet. But toward the crack in space. Toward what was trying to come through. A transmission burst from it. Not just to the fleet. To everything. Every system. Every mind capable of understanding. And the message was simple. Containment compromised. A pause. Then, prepare for breach. The crack widened. The darkness behind it surged forward. And from within, something began to emerge. Not a ship. Not a structure. Something else. Something wrong. Lyra's voice trembled as she watched from afar. That's what they were holding back. No one answered. Because no one could. And as the first true shape of the thing, beyond the veil, became visible, the Dreadnought moved to meet it. The first thing the Conquered understood was that it had never truly known fear before. Not like this. Not the kind that silenced entire fleets in an instant. The breach widened. Not explosively. Not violently. But inevitably. Like something ancient and patient was simply stepping through a doorway that had finally been unlocked. Darkness spilled outward, but it wasn't empty. It moved with purpose. It observed. And then, it began to take shape. At first, the sensors refused to process it. Data loops collapsed. Visual feeds distorted. Some ships lost all imaging entirely. Others saw something different, each crew describing shapes that contradicted one another. To some, it looked like a massive, shifting mass of tendrils. To others, it was geometric, sharp angles folding into impossible structures. To a few, it looked almost familiar. Almost human. That's not possible, a Conquered commander whispered, staring at his screen. It's adapting to perception. Or worse, it wasn't adapting. It was choosing how to be seen. Lyra watched from the Saren's wake, her hands gripping the command rail tightly. Her display flickered between interpretations, never settling. But one thing remained constant across every version. It was aware. Not just alive. Not just present. Aware. And it was looking at them. Then it moved. Not through space, but through distance itself. One moment it was beyond the breach. The next it was closer. No acceleration. No transition. Just closer. Several Conquered ships reacted instinctively, firing defensive bursts. Energy weapons streaked across the void. And vanished. Not absorbed. Not deflected. Erased. Like they had never existed. The entity didn't retaliate. It didn't need to. Instead, it tilted. Not physically. Conceptually. Like its attention had shifted. And then, it focused on a single ship. The vessel froze. Not by command. Not by system failure. Its crew couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Every signal from their nervous systems halted mid-transmission. Time inside the ship is stopped. From the outside, it drifted silently. Untouched. Unharmed. But completely still. And then, it was gone. Not destroyed. Not displaced. Gone. No energy spike. No debris. No trace. As if it had been removed from reality. Panic erupted across the fleet. Formations broke. Commands overlapped. Some ships tried to retreat. Others charged forward in desperate defiance. None of it mattered. Because the thing wasn't attacking. Not yet. It was learning. Why isn't it destroying us? Someone shouted. Lyra answered before she realized she was speaking. Because it doesn't understand us yet. A chilling silence followed. And when it does, another voice asked. Lyra didn't respond. Because she already knew. Then, the Dreadnought moved. It didn't rush. Didn't accelerate. It simply was closer. Positioning itself between the entity and the fleet. A wall. A shield. A final line. Its surface shifted rapidly now, energy patterns intensifying. Sections of its structure opened, revealing layers of weapons unlike anything the Conquered had ever seen. Not cannons. Not launch systems. Something else. Something deeper. And then, it fired. There was no flash. No beam. No visible attack. Just a ripple in space. a distortion that expanded outward from the Dreadnought like a silent wave. When it touched the entity, reality broke. For a fraction of a second, the thing was visible in its entirety. Not just a fragment, not a perception, its true form, and every mind that witnessed it screamed. Not physically, mentally, instinctively, because it wasn't something that could exist. It had too many angles, too many layers. Parts of it existed out of sync with time. Other parts stretched into directions that didn't exist. And at its core, something was looking back. Not at the fleet, not at the Dreadnought, at everything. Then the ripple collapsed, and part of the entity, just part, was gone, erased. For the first time, it reacted. The darkness surged violently. The breach behind it expanded further. More shapes pressed against the edge of reality. More of them, waiting, watching. The entity didn't retreat, didn't hesitate. Instead, it turned its full attention toward the Dreadnought. And for the first time, it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in something deeper, something that bypassed language entirely. Every mind in the system felt it. A single, unified message. You resist. The Dreadnought responded instantly. Its reply carried weight. History, exhaustion, and something unmistakably human. We endure. The entity pulsed, almost curious. Then, the second message came. Heavier, darker, filled with something that felt disturbingly close to recognition. You have changed. A pause. Then, the final realization. You are no longer prey. The breach widened further. More shapes pressed forward. Hungry, eager. Lyra felt her heart drop. Because that wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was an acknowledgement. And the worst part, it sounded almost excited. The Dreadnought's energy surged again. Weapons charging. Systems pushing beyond limits. Preparing for something far worse than containment. Because now, the enemy wasn't just breaking through. It was beginning to understand them, the moment the entity understood. Everything changed. It didn't rush forward, didn't attack in the way the conquered expected. Instead, it paused, as if thinking, as if processing something new, something it had never encountered before. Then, it adapted. The next movement wasn't chaotic. It was precise, calculated, deliberate. The entity shifted its form, stabilizing into something more consistent. Less abstract, less impossible, still wrong, but now structured. They're learning, Lyra whispered. No one argued, because they could all see it. The thing beyond the veil was no longer just a force of nature. It was becoming something else, something closer to them. And then, the galaxy broke, not just in Sol, everywhere. Across distant systems, far beyond the battle. Rifts began to open. Small at first, hairline fractures in space, invisible to most sensors. Until they were. A research station orbiting a red dwarf star transmitted the first confirmed sighting. The footage lasted 12 seconds. That was all. 12 seconds before the signal cut. A tear in space. A shape emerging, smaller than the one near Sol, but just as wrong. Then another report came, and another, and another. The breach wasn't isolated. It was spreading. They're not breaking through here, Lyra said, her voice tightening as data flooded in. They're mapping us. Her crew turned toward her. What do you mean? She pointed to the expanding network of rifts appearing across the galaxy. They followed the Dreadnought, learned its position, learned the structure of our space. Her voice dropped. And now they're opening doors everywhere. Panic spread faster than light. Entire systems went dark. Civilian evacuations began. Military fleets scattered, trying to contain threats they couldn't even understand. And through it all, the Dreadnought moved. It vanished from its position near the primary breach, and reappeared in another system entirely. No transition, no travel, just there. A second entity had begun to emerge from a smaller rift. Before it could fully form, the Dreadnought struck. Again, no visible weapon. Just a distortion, a collapse, a rewriting of reality itself. The entity disappeared mid-emergence. Erased, cheers erupted across that system. Relief, hope. Then, another rift opened. Closer this time, and another entity stepped through. The Dreadnought moved again, and again, and again, everywhere at once, holding the line, sealing breaches, destroying anything that crossed through. But there were too many. For every rift it closed, two more appeared. For every entity it erased, more pressed against the boundaries of reality, waiting their turn. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Dreadnought began to slow. Energy output is dropping, Lyra's sensor officer reported. It's still beyond anything we can measure, but it's declining. Lyra clenched her jaw. It's not declining, she said quietly. It's being drained. Because the Dreadnought wasn't just fighting. It was maintaining the veil, holding back the original breach, containing the largest threat, while also trying to stop the spread. It was fighting a war on two fronts, and losing both. Why don't they just leave? One of the crew asked. Fall back, regroup, survive. Lyra didn't hesitate. Because if they leave, she gestured toward the main breach. That comes through, and as if the universe itself wanted to prove her right. The massive entity at the original fracture surged forward again. Stronger, more defined, more aware. This time it didn't hesitate. It reached out, not physically, not with force, but with something else. Across the conquered fleet, across every system connected by communication. A signal spread, unstoppable, unblackable, and within it, a message, not translated, not interpreted, just understood. We see you now. Entire crews collapsed as the presence brushed against their minds. Not attacking, not yet, just observing, cataloging, learning. Lyra dropped to one knee, her vision blurring. It felt like something was reaching inside her thoughts, pulling them apart, studying them. Then, it found something. Humanity. The Dreadnought. The concept of resistance. And suddenly, the presence shifted. Its focus sharpened. The message changed. Heavier, more direct. You are not like the others. Lyra gasped, her breath shaking. Because she knew. It wasn't talking to the conquered. It was talking to humanity. Across space, the Dreadnought surged with energy one more time. Brighter than before. Stronger. Pushing itself beyond limits that should have destroyed it. Because it understood something too. This wasn't just an invasion. This was recognition. And recognition meant something worse than destruction. It meant escalation. The entity at the main breach expanded further. More of it pushing through. More of it becoming real. And behind it, for the first time, shapes moved. Plural. Not one enemy. Not one force. An entire horde waiting to enter. Lyra's voice broke as she stared at the widening fracture. There's more. No one answered. Because now, They could all see it. And for the first time since the war began, the Dreadnought didn't move immediately. It hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, as if even it was calculating the impossible. The hesitation lasted less than a second. But in a war like this, a second was eternity. The Dreadnought moved again. Not forward, not back, but across, instantly reappearing between multiple collapsing rifts, like it existed in several places at once. Everywhere it arrived, reality stabilized. For a moment, then broke again somewhere else. It wasn't winning. It was delaying collapse. Lyra watched from the Saren's wake, her ship trembling under gravitational turbulence that shouldn't exist this far from the breach. "Status report," she shouted. The sensor officer's voice cracked. "Containment fields are dropping across 3 systems, 5, no 7. Another pause. "Commander, the Dreadnought is compensating, but it's spreading itself thinner every cycle." Lyra's jaw tightened. "It's not a ship," she whispered. "It's a seal." Across the conquered fleet, panic had evolved into something quieter. Acceptance. Because they could all see the truth now. The Dreadnought wasn't fighting like a weapon. It was suffering like a barrier under pressure, holding back something that refused to stay contained. And then, the message came. Not from the entity, not from the enemy, from Earth. A global transmission opened across all frequencies. Human command channels, military bands, diplomatic lines. Every screen in the galaxy lit up with the same face. The same tired expression. The same impossible calm. A human officer stood before a dim control room, alarms flashing behind him. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "You've seen enough," he said quietly. "No introduction. No ceremony. Just truth. We told you not to come here." A pause. A breath. A heavy one. "You thought we were hiding a ship." His eyes flicked upward, as if looking at something far beyond the camera. "You were wronged." The screen behind him displayed fragmented data, sealed archives, classified beyond conquered access. But enough leaked through. Enough to understand. "Long before your empires mapped the stars," he continued, "something was already here." His voice dropped. And it didn't belong to this reality. Across the fleet, silence spread. Even the alarms felt distant. The human officer stepped closer to the camera. "We didn't build the Dreadnought as a weapon." A pause. "We built it as a doorstop." Lyra's breath caught. A doorstop. Something so absurd, so impossibly understated. For something so massive. The officer's expression hardened slightly. "And it's failing." Behind him, systems flickered violently. Red alerts cascaded across consoles. But he didn't turn. Didn't react. Like it had been expected. Like it had been inevitable. "You want to know what's out there?" he asked softly. No one answered. But everyone listened. "We don't have a name for it anymore." A long silence. Then, "We used to." The screen glitched. Just for a second. And in that second, something moved behind him. Not visible. Not fully. But enough to make every viewing species recoil instinctively. The signal stabilized. The officer's voice was quieter now. Almost human. Tired. The Dreadnought isn't holding back an enemy. He exhaled slowly. It's holding back everything that shouldn't exist. Lyra felt her stomach drop. Everything. Not a species. Not an invasion. Everything. The transmission continued. And when it breaks, he paused. Just once. There won't be another line of defense. The screen went dark. Across space, the Dreadnought surged again. But something had changed. Its movements were no longer smooth. No longer absolute. There were delays now. Micro-fractures in its control, like strain spreading through its core. "Commander," the sensor officer whispered, "it's stabilizing fewer rifts than before." Lyra didn't respond immediately, because she understood what that meant. "It's losing containment," she said quietly. At the primary breach, the entity pressed forward again. And this time, the Dreadnought didn't fully stop it. Just slowed it. Barely. A fragment slipped through. Small, barely noticeable compared to the vast scale of the war. But it didn't behave like the others. It didn't attack. It didn't form immediately. It looked around. And then, it learned. Across multiple systems, secondary rifts began to destabilize further. Not opening randomly anymore. Opening strategically. As if guided. As if coordinated. "They're adapting faster," someone whispered. "No," Lyra said softly. "They're understanding faster." The Dreadnought shifted again. Harder this time. More violent. A ripple of energy tore through nearby space, erasing multiple emerging entities instantly. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. Because now, the enemy wasn't just reacting. It was planning. And then, something unprecedented happened. The entity at the main breach stopped pushing. For the first time, it paused. The entire system fell silent. Even the Dreadnought held still. Then, it spoke again. Not as a single voice, but layered. Countless echoes within one message. "You are weakening." The Dreadnought responded instantly. Not words, but action. A surge of containment energy, so massive it bent light across entire systems. For a moment, the breach shrank. Hope sparked. Then, the entity replied. Calm, certain, almost curious. "Then we wait." And it did. It didn't push harder. Didn't force the breach. Didn't resist containment. It simply waited. And that was worse. Because Lyra understood immediately. Her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't need to break through now." A pause. Her eyes widened. "It just needs the Dreadnought to fail eventually." The realization spread through the fleet like ice. The enemy wasn't rushing anymore. It wasn't fighting time. It was outlasting it. And for the first time, the Dreadnought hesitated again. Longer this time. Stronger. Like it knew. It couldn't hold forever. And somewhere deep inside its massive structure, something began to crack. The Dreadnought did not break all at once. It stuttered, like a dying star refusing to collapse in a single moment, instead stretching its final resistance across impossible time. Across the Sol system, reality flickered. Rifts that had been held shut began to tremble again. Not opening fully, just testing the edges. Like something on the other side was checking if the lock was still strong. Lyra watched from the Saren's wake, her ship now barely stable. Every system screamed warnings. Every sensor showed the same truth. Containment was failing. Slowly, irreversibly. "Report," she shouted. Her sensor officer's voice was hollow. "Dreadnought output is down by 40%, then 50, it's not recovering anymore." A pause. "Commander, it's losing synchronization." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment. That meant only one thing. The Dreadnought wasn't just damaged. It was becoming separated from what it was holding back. Across space, the massive structure shifted again. But its movements were no longer precise. No longer absolute. There were delays now. Gaps. Errors. And through those gaps, the enemy watched. Patient. Unblinking. The conquered fleets had retreated by now. Not out of strategy. Out of survival. No one called it cowardice anymore. because there was nothing left to prove. Only something to escape. But Lyra didn't retreat. She couldn't, because something about the Dreadnought's signal kept pulling her attention. A faint transmission buried beneath layers of containment noise. Human, weak, fragmented. She forced her ship closer, ignoring alarms, ignoring warnings, ignoring the voice of instinct screaming at her to turn back. "Decrypt it," she ordered. The system struggled, fought, then finally, it broke through. A human voice filled the bridge. Not the officer from before. Someone else. Older, slower, tired in a way that felt final. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "then it means we're almost gone." Lyra's throat tightened. "We built the Dreadnought knowing it wouldn't last forever." A pause. A soft exhale. Almost like a laugh that never formed. It was never meant to win. Another pause. Only to delay judgment. The transmission flickered violently. The Dreadnought was interfering. Struggling. Dying. "And if you're still there," the voice continued, "then you need to understand something very important." Silence stretched. Long. Heavy. The things beyond the veil don't invade. A deeper breath. They return. Lyra's hands clenched. Return. Not invade. Not conquer. Return. The voice continued, weaker now. "And we are what they left behind to stop it." The transmission fractured. The Dreadnought's interference increased. But Lyra forced it stable. Just long enough. "Not a weapon," the voice whispered, "not an army." A pause. Just a memory that learned how to fight. Then, static. The signal almost died. But one final fragment pushed through. Clear. Sharp. Final. "And when we're gone." A pause. "Don't look for us." The transmission ended. Across the Sol system, the Dreadnought gave a sudden, violent surge. For a moment, reality stabilized again. Rift sealed. Entities pushed back. The breach narrowed. Hope flickered. For the last time. Then, something changed. The enemy did not push forward. Did not break through. Did not attack. It responded. Not as one, but as many. A chorus of presence, expanding across the fracture like consciousness spreading through cracks in glass. And then, it spoke, not to the Dreadnought, not to the fleet, but to everything. "You are D-I-M-I-N-I-S-H-I-N-G." The Dreadnought surged again. But weaker, slower. The message continued. Calm, certain, almost understanding. "Then we will wait longer." And in that moment, Lyra understood. Her voice shook. No. A whisper. It's not trying to break through anymore. Her eyes widened. It's waiting for the seal to disappear on its own. Across space, the Dreadnought trembled. Not physically, not structurally, but in purpose, because it understood it too. It couldn't win anymore. Only delay. Only prolong. Only hold. Until nothing remained to hold with. The fleets that remained scattered further. Communication broke down. Hope fractured. Civilization itself began to feel temporary. And then, the Dreadnought did something unexpected. It stopped firing. Completely. For the first time since the war began. It went still. Lyra froze. What is it doing? No answer came. The Dreadnought's energy patterns shifted. Not outward. Not defensive. But inward. Concentrating. Compressing. As if it was preparing something final. Something irreversible. The entity noticed immediately. The breach pulsed. Curious. What are you doing? The Dreadnought answered. Not in words, but in presence. A final transmission that spread through every surviving system. Human, heavy, peaceful, ending the wait. Lyra's heart stopped. No, she whispered. No, no, no. The Dreadnought began collapsing inward. Not exploding. Not dying. Condensing. Space folded around it. Reality bent toward its center. The breach reacted violently. For the first time, panic, the enemy surged forward. Too late. The Dreadnought's final protocol activated. A collapse of containment so absolute it didn't destroy space. It removed the possibility of breach. A perfect final seal. The explosion of silence that followed was not soundless. It was absence. And when it ended, the Sol system was still. Too still. No Dreadnought. No breach. No entities. Just emptiness. Lyra floated in orbit, her ship drifting through silent space. Her voice barely existed. Did it work? No sensors responded. No signals returned. Nothing confirmed anything. Then, far beyond the system, at the edge of perception, a flicker, just one, like something enormous. Still watching, still waiting. But now, contained differently, and the last fragment of human transmission appeared on her console. Not planned, not sent, but left behind. If the stars are quiet,